1 million times faster than Google. That is what Chinese scientists claimed when they unveiled Zuchongzhi 3.0, a 105-qubit superconducting quantum computer that they say performs certain computations 10 to the power of 15 times faster than the most powerful classical supercomputer in existence. While the AI conversation has dominated every tech headline for the past 3 years, a parallel technology race has been accelerating in Asia with far less attention: quantum computing. And in 2026, this race has crossed a threshold from laboratory curiosity to early commercial deployment. Japan just committed $7.4 billion to quantum technology. China is mobilizing 1 trillion yuan, roughly $138 billion, through a national venture capital fund targeting quantum and AI. And Singapore just became the first country outside the United States to host Quantinuum's quantum hardware. The quantum computing era is arriving faster than most people realize, and Asia is at the center of it.
Those numbers are huge, but I think a lot of our listeners might be wondering, what exactly can a quantum computer do that a regular computer cannot?
That is the right question to start with, and the honest answer is nuanced. A quantum computer is not simply a faster version of a classical computer. It operates on fundamentally different principles, using qubits that can exist in multiple states simultaneously through a property called superposition, and that can be linked through a phenomenon called entanglement. This gives quantum computers an advantage on specific types of problems: molecular simulation for drug discovery, optimization problems in logistics and finance, and cryptography. They are not going to replace your laptop for writing emails, but for certain classes of computations, they can solve in minutes what would take a classical supercomputer millions of years.
And the Asian countries are investing heavily. Walk me through the landscape.
China is the most aggressive. The Zuchongzhi series of processors, developed by a team at the Chinese Academy of Sciences and the University of Science and Technology of China, represents the most advanced superconducting quantum hardware outside of Google and IBM. Zuchongzhi 3.0, with 105 qubits, was unveiled in March 2025. By December, the team had advanced to Zuchongzhi 3.2, which achieved a critical milestone, an error suppression factor of 1.4 using surface code logical qubits with a code distance of 7. For non-experts, that means the system is operating below the error correction threshold, which is the point at which adding more qubits actually reduces errors rather than increasing them. That is a fundamental technical milestone.
And then there was the Zhuangzi 2.0 breakthrough in January.
Right. Published in Nature in January 2026, researchers from the Chinese Academy of Sciences Institute of Physics and Peking University used a 78-qubit processor called Zhuangzi 2.0 to observe and control a quantum phenomenon called pre-thermalization, a temporary ordered phase that appears before a quantum system collapses into chaos. South China Morning Post reported that China's new quantum computer hit a stability milestone, beating Google on efficiency. The significance is not raw qubit count, it is the ability to control quantum behavior in ways that have practical applications for material science and quantum simulation.
Now, Japan has taken a different approach.
Japan's quantum strategy is distinctive because it explicitly links quantum computing to its semiconductor industrial policy. In April 2025, Fujitsu-RIKEN, Japan's National Research Institute, unveiled a 256-qubit superconducting quantum computer, quadrupling the capacity of their previous system. The roadmap is ambitious: 1,000 qubits targeted for 2026 and over 10,000 qubits by fiscal 2030. And Japan announced a landmark $7.4 billion quantum computing commitment in 2026, the largest per capita quantum investment of any country.
The RIKEN hybrid computing project is particularly interesting.
Extremely. RIKEN is leading a project to integrate quantum computers with classical supercomputers, specifically linking quantum hardware to the Fugaku supercomputer, which was the world's fastest when it launched. The idea is hybrid quantum classical computing, using quantum processors for the parts of a computation where they have an advantage and classical supercomputers for everything else. They are deploying both ion trap systems from Quantinuum and superconducting systems from IBM. An IBM quantum system 2, named IBM_Kobe, was installed at RIKEN's Kobe campus in June 2025. NVIDIA is also partnering with RIKEN on 2 new supercomputers for scientific AI and quantum computing, scheduled to be operational in spring 2026.
Let's talk about Singapore and South Korea, because they are taking yet another approach.
Singapore has positioned itself as the quantum computing hub for Southeast Asia and the broader Asia Pacific. The biggest signal came when Quantinuum, the company formed from the merger of Honeywell Quantum Solutions and Cambridge Quantum, established a major R&D and operations center in Singapore and installed Helios, its first quantum hardware installation outside of the United States. This is a trapped ion quantum computer, which uses a different physical approach than the superconducting systems used by Google, IBM, and China. Quantinuum is positioning Singapore as a global command center for quantum-driven applications in pharmaceuticals, finance, and material science.
Why Singapore specifically?
Several reasons. Singapore has substantial government investment in quantum research, strong university programs at NUS and NTU, a growing cluster of quantum startups, and, importantly, proximity to the financial services industry that is expected to be one of the earliest commercial adopters of quantum computing. Portfolio optimization, risk modeling, derivatives pricing, these are all quantum advantage use cases that the major Asian financial centers want to be first to exploit.
And South Korea?
South Korea has allocated $1.5 billion for quantum research through 2030, with a focus on quantum processors and quantum networking. Samsung and SK Telecom are both investing in quantum research and quantum-resistant communications. The Samsung angle is interesting because Samsung's semiconductor division could potentially become a manufacturer of quantum chip components, the cryogenic electronics that quantum computers need to operate. SK Telecom is focused on quantum key distribution, using quantum principles to create theoretically unbreakable encryption for telecommunications networks.
Now let's talk about the commercial applications, because I think that is where the skepticism lies. People have been hearing about quantum computing being 5 years away for 20 years.
That is a fair criticism, and it is important to be honest about where we actually are. The global quantum computing market is still relatively small, roughly $2 billion in 2025, projected to reach somewhere between $7 and $15 billion by 2033, depending on which research firm you ask. Compare that to the AI market, which is measured in hundreds of billions. Quantum computing is real, but it is early. The commercial applications that are closest to deployment are in 3 areas.
What are they?
First, molecular simulation for drug discovery and material science. Pharmaceutical companies like Roche and Merck are already working with quantum computing companies to simulate molecular interactions that are too complex for classical computers. This is where quantum has the clearest theoretical advantage. Second, financial optimization. Portfolio optimization, risk analysis, and derivatives pricing involve the kind of combinatorial mathematics that quantum computers excel at. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and several Asian banks are running quantum experiments. Third, cryptography. Both the threat of quantum computers breaking existing encryption and the opportunity of quantum secure communications. This is where SK Telecom's investment in quantum key distribution fits.
The cryptography angle has security implications that go beyond commercial.
Enormous implications. The concept is called harvest now, decrypt later. Adversaries are collecting encrypted data today with the expectation that quantum computers will be able to break the encryption in the future. This means that any sensitive data with a long shelf life, military communications, diploma cables, financial records, healthcare data, is potentially at risk even before quantum computers reach the scale needed to crack current encryption. That is why governments across Asia are investing in quantum-resistant encryption and quantum key distribution. It is not a theoretical concern. It is a national security priority.
How does the US-China technology rivalry factor into the quantum race?
Quantum computing is explicitly covered by US export controls. The US restricts the export of quantum computing technology and components to China, similar to the AI chip restrictions we have covered extensively. But there is a key difference. Quantum computing hardware is much harder to restrict because the approaches are more diverse. Superconducting qubits, trapped ions, photonic systems, topological approaches, each uses different physical components. China's Zuchongzhi processors are built with domestically developed superconducting technology. The quantum race is less susceptible to the kind of choke point control that the US has exercised in semiconductors through ASML and TSMC because there is no single dominant manufacturing platform.
So quantum computing is a technology where export controls are less effective.
Which is part of why China has been able to achieve competitive results despite broad US technology restrictions. The quantum domain is one of the few areas where China's technical capabilities genuinely rival or arguably exceed those of the West in certain specific metrics. The Zuchongzhi 1 million times faster than Google claim is disputed by some Western researchers, but the underlying technical progress is real and independently verified through peer-reviewed publications.
Contrarian corner. The consensus view is that quantum computing is the next transformational technology after AI, that Asia is investing appropriately, and that commercial applications are approaching. What is the skeptical read?
The contrarian position is that quantum computing is the most overhyped technology in Asia right now, and that the billions being invested may not generate commercial returns for a decade or more. Here is the argument. The fundamental challenge of quantum computing is not building more qubits, it is error correction. Current quantum computers are what researchers call noisy intermediate scale quantum, or NISQ devices. They make errors, a lot of errors. The error rates on current systems mean that for most practical applications, the quantum computation produces unreliable results unless you dedicate the vast majority of your qubits to error correction rather than actual computation.
How bad is the error rate problem?
Current estimates suggest that to run a commercially useful quantum algorithm, like breaking RSA encryption or simulating a complex molecule, you would need roughly 1 million physical qubits to produce approximately 1,000 logical error-corrected qubits. The largest systems today have around 100 to 256 physical qubits. That means we need a roughly 4,000-fold increase in qubit count just to reach the threshold for the most commonly cited commercial applications. Fujitsu's target of 10,000 qubits by 2030 is ambitious, but still an order of magnitude below what many applications require.
So the billions being invested are going into technology that is still fundamentally pre-commercial?
For the most demanding applications, yes. And this is where I think the Asian investment numbers deserve scrutiny. China's 1 trillion yuan venture capital fund targeting quantum and AI is extraordinary, but the "and AI" part is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that number. I would expect the vast majority of that funding flows to AI companies, not quantum. Japan's $7.4 billion commitment is large, but spread over multiple years and multiple research programs. The question is whether governments are investing in quantum computing because of a realistic commercial timeline or because of a perceived national security imperative. And those are very different investment rationales with very different expected return profiles.
The national security argument seems stronger than the commercial argument right now.
I think that is correct. The harvest now, decrypt later thread creates genuine urgency around quantum-resistant cryptography, which is a defensive application. But defensive applications do not generate commercial returns. They are costs that governments and corporations bear to protect existing systems. The offensive commercial applications, drug discovery, financial optimization, material science, are the ones that would justify the investment on a return basis. And those applications need error-corrected quantum computers that do not yet exist at the required scale.
What about the hybrid quantum classical approach that Japan is pursuing? Does that change the timeline?
This is the most promising near-term path, and it is where Japan's strategy is arguably smarter than China's pure quantum approach. The RIKEN hybrid computing project acknowledges that quantum computers are not going to replace classical computers. They're going to work alongside them. You use quantum processors for specific subproblems within a larger computation, and classical supercomputers for everything else. This approach can generate value at current qubit counts because you are not asking the quantum system to solve the entire problem, only the parts where quantum has an advantage. But even the hybrid approach has limitations: the latency of transferring data between quantum and classical systems, the overhead of error mitigation, and the difficulty of decomposing real-world problems into quantum-amenable subproblems.
What about the competitive dynamics between the different quantum hardware approaches?
This is where the race gets really uncertain. There are at least 4 major approaches competing: superconducting qubits used by Google, IBM, and most Chinese systems, trapped ions used by Quantinuum and the system they installed in Singapore, photonic systems being developed by companies like PsiQuantum and Xanadu, and neutral atom systems used by companies like Quera and Pascal. Each approach has different strengths and weaknesses, and it is genuinely unclear which will ultimately scale to commercially useful sizes first. The diversity of approaches is actually good for the field. It means that even if one approach hits a dead end, others may succeed. But it also means that investors are placing bets across multiple platforms, and most of those bets will not pay off.
So the quantum computing investment thesis requires very long time horizons and tolerance for uncertainty.
And that is exactly the profile that government-funded research programs are suited for and that venture capital is poorly suited for. The best quantum computing investments may be the boring ones, not the quantum computer companies themselves, but the companies that benefit from quantum computing's eventual arrival. Quantum-resistant encryption companies, companies that build the classical computing infrastructure around quantum systems, and the cryogenic electronics manufacturers that every quantum computer needs regardless of which qubit technology wins.
Action items. What should investors and business operators track here?
3 action items. First, track error correction milestones as the single most important technical indicator for quantum computing's commercial timeline. The December 2025 announcement that Zuchongzhi 3.2 achieved an error suppression factor of 1.4 below the error correction threshold was a genuine milestone. It demonstrated that adding more qubits can reduce errors rather than compounding them. The next threshold to watch is whether any system demonstrates a logical error rate below 10 to the negative 6, 1 error per million operations, which is the approximate level needed for commercially useful computation. Google, IBM, and the Chinese teams are all targeting this milestone. When it is achieved, and it will likely be reported in a high-profile journal like Nature or Science, it signals that the path to commercially useful quantum computing is no longer theoretical. Until that milestone is reached, quantum computing remains in the research phase, regardless of how many qubits are announced.
Second,
Monitor the hybrid quantum classical computing deployments in Japan as the most likely path to near-term commercial value. RIKEN's project to integrate quantum processors with the Fugaku supercomputer is the most ambitious hybrid computing effort in the world. The two new NVIDIA RIKEN supercomputers scheduled for spring 2026 will provide the classical computing backbone for this hybrid approach. The specific metric to watch is whether any real-world problem in material science, drug discovery, or financial modeling demonstrates a measurable advantage from the hybrid quantum classical approach compared to classical computing alone. This quantum advantage in practice demonstration would be far more commercially significant than any qubit count announcement. Watch for publications from the RIKEN collaboration and from IBM's IBM_COBE system at RIKEN COBE.
Third,
Position for the quantum security transition rather than the quantum computing transition. The most immediate commercial impact of quantum computing is defensive, the need to upgrade encryption systems before quantum computers can break current standards. NIST finalized its post-quantum cryptography standards in 2024, and the migration to quantum-resistant encryption is already underway in financial services, government, and telecommunications. SK Telecom's quantum key distribution investment, Singapore's positioning as a quantum security hub through the Quantinuum installation, and the broader quantum-resistant encryption market are all investable themes that do not depend on quantum computers becoming commercially useful in the near term. The quantum security market is growing now, not in 2030. Companies like Isara, PQ Shield, and the quantum networking arms of major telecom operators are building real revenue today.
the three signals are error correction milestones as the technical gate for commercial quantum, hybrid quantum classical results from Japan's RIKEN project as the most likely near-term value demonstration, and quantum security companies as the investable theme that does not depend on the quantum computing timeline.
And the broader insight is that the Asian quantum computing race is real, well-funded, and technically competitive, but the commercial payoff depends on solving the error correction problem at scale, which remains genuinely uncertain in its timeline. The governments investing billions are making a rational bet on a technology that could be transformational, but investors expecting near-term returns should focus on the periphery, the security, infrastructure, and enabling technology companies, rather than the quantum computer makers themselves.
That distinction between the quantum computing timeline and the quantum security timeline is really important.
And if you want the full written breakdown with the technical comparisons, the investment figures, and the commercial application analysis, it is in today's newsletter at asiatechmacro.substack.com. In our next episode, we are looking at the Asian wealth management revolution, specifically how the explosion of high net worth individuals in India, China, and Southeast Asia is reshaping private banking, family offices, and the flow of capital across Asia. Singapore and Hong Kong are competing fiercely for this capital, and the stakes are measured in trillions.
Trillions. That is going to be a great one.
Stay data-driven. Bye.